Hello. See a few faces. Hi, Rachel. Good to see you. Zoe will be tuning in just a minute. We've got some questions. I don't know if you guys can hear me. My headphones are plugged in. um, but cool. Hope you're all having a good start to the week. Great. All right. Well, we have some questions that we wanted to go over. Thank you guys for, as usual, yeah, sending those. Really, really appreciate it. It's been so helpful to have some direction on these calls. That way, at least for me, and I know for Zoe too, like having all the questions makes us feel like we're utilizing our time really well. And then we, when we get feedback from you guys about how you've, gotten a certain, gained a certain perspective, or uh, a tip that you got from the calls is like worked for you on a long run or something. That always just kind of makes us happy. We were just talking about that a little while ago when we were in the car. Um, yeah, gosh, it's just going to be us today, so I think things will
Ooh,
be
OG crew.
a little bit, yeah, yeah, the OG crew. We do have a few questions, like I mentioned, and hopefully we'll get to all of them. If we get to all of them before the time's up, that would be amazing. But yeah, as you all know, we can be a little long winded with some of these. So who knows if we'll get to them all or not. If not, we will be reconvening next Monday as well. So we can just keep it going. That way, there's a whole wealth of information out there for you guys. And if something comes to mind, per usual, I know some of you guys are at work and whatnot, so you might not want to chat, but you can always use the chat box. Follow up questions about adding some clarity to anything we say or anything that you've noticed in your own training processes. Always welcomed. We appreciate it and can really help to kind of add to the conversation here. Well, cool. Yeah, why don't we?
Dive right
We'll
in.
just dive right
Yeah.
in. Awesome. Yeah, where to start? A warm up question for me. Um, cool.
Got to do some like emotional leg swings before diving in.
Yeah, I do.
The Myrtle, full Myrtle warm up.
All right. Here's a cool question about cadence. Um, yeah. Do you believe that there are more stride runners versus cadence runners? Over my years of running, I have read about the importance of having a higher cadence. I generally am well above 165 or 170 in fast efforts, but in my easy efforts, it's usually below 160. I get that all the literature says above 160 is optimal, but it's never felt natural to me. I don't feel comfortable at a higher cadence during my easy efforts. If I just go with the flow and run easy by feel, I overall feel good on these runs. But I do remember you saying part of easy running is learning to translate running from form and mechanics at harder efforts, and translating that to easier runs. So, is cadence something that is important to replicate from a hard effort to an easy effort? Um, Such a good question. Uh, would you like me to start with my answer to this, Zoe?
I'll just kind of give a brief intro.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds
Cadence
good.
is one of those things that we really see a lot of runners really overthink. And I think that there's some pretty telling indicators in the language of this question here. Like, you're not always going to be at optimal form or optimal cadence when you're running, and that is okay. The point of practicing strides and doing hills is to get closer to that more optimal form, closer to that more optimal cadence, while accepting that you should never do something that feels bad or makes you run not easy. Like, we'll have a lot of runners say, well, I didn't run easy because I wanted to hit this specific cadence. And to do that, I was running a little bit harder than purely easy. Like, that's pretty counterproductive in your training. Cadence, like, I've literally never paid attention to my cadence ever for a second in my life. I have no idea what my cadence is at any point. So like, that is just to demonstrate that it doesn't need to be something that you lose sleep over or obsess about. If it's something that you struggle with, you can like pay some amount of attention to it. But cadence is a metric that I think a lot of people get hung up on way, 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 way before it becomes very relevant to them.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, Zoe. I definitely think that I agree with you. But I think that there's some like maybe some fundamentals that every athlete could focus on that would maybe enhance the quality of their easy runs and further allow for that kind of neuro pathway development, that connection, that brain kind of to body connection, where you're starting to um, really feel like the easy running is truly easy and not plodding.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
so
we want to avoid plodding.
Like, and I think everybody knows kind of what the plod feels like.
Oh, we've all plodded.
It's like, nothing's really syncing up. You're feeling like heavy and like your legs aren't moving.
It's like you're spending a lot of ground contact.
A lot of ground contact time. Yeah, kind of like my run today.
The opposite of Jim Walmsley.
Yes. Who's
almost
like
never touches the ground.
Out there. Yeah. He's like insane.
No ground contact at all.
Yeah. So I guess, every runner, we think about, a lot of people ask about form. They want form analysis and all this stuff. And like the truth is that everybody's biomechanics are going to be a little bit different. There are like some general rules that kind of apply across the board. But like each of us are going to kind of have our own running style. Like if you've ever been to a race, you'll see there's a variety of different running styles in like the elite women's and men's fields. Like sometimes I'm blown away at how good some of these runners are and how like kind of awkward their form looks. So don't worry about your form so much and don't worry too much about the cadence, like Zoe says.
Yeah, like there's no one magic number that you'll hit and finally like be Jim Walmsley. That number is going to vary person to person. And sometimes obsessing about it can be detrimental to your development because you just become hung up on things that aren't important. So it's kind of like reframing it. Instead of thinking about the outcome, i.e. a specific cadence, think about the process you're going to employ to get there.
Yeah, and I think that like some of those things that you think about, like trying to think about like having a light, quick stride and a smooth stride. Like being smooth is so much more important than, being having really quick turnover. Because smooth usually implies good efficiency and minimal ground contact time. There are some things that in terms of like stride length and things like that, speed is always going to be a function of turnover and stride length. So if your stride is really short, you might be sacrificing some speed there. But again, if your stride is too long, you might be striking with your feet way out in front of you with a straight leg, which causes a lot of impact forces on the musculoskeletal system. So, that could be kind of like the opposite end of like, all right, maybe I'm aiming for a cadence of 200, which is like insanely fast. And maybe you should only be doing that on like your strides if you're like a super quick athlete. And then again, like if you're probably somebody who's like in the 140s, your stride length might be a little bit, your stride might be a little too long, right? So like instead of paying attention to the number, pay attention to like how your stride feels. Am I being light on my feet today? Are my feet landing underneath me? So I'm kind of getting more of a forefoot strike. Or am I like, or can I like visibly see like my legs are really like landing out in front of me? We see a lot of athletes who kind of develop, some knee issues or lower leg issues, and a lot of that is because the stride length is a little bit more overdeveloped, or there's some more emphasis there. And although like there's nothing wrong with having, a longer stride, athletes who are taller tend to have longer strides. Athletes who are shorter tend to have a higher cadence. It's very kind of individual, but in the end, like you really want to make sure that that stride length, keep those feet underneath you. That kind of general tip, something that we really want to focus on. Yeah, David is, yeah, he always says that, prance like a pony. Um, I think that's a pretty funny thing. I can't really picture that as like translating over to a good running stride, but you get the point. Like just have fun with it, keep it light. Yeah, don't overthink it too much. If you're like really thinking like long, powerful kind of like lunging movements while you're running, especially some athletes get into that a little bit too much on their hills.
Or sprint, like they think like, whenever they do a stride, they're like straining because they have to go hard. We don't want to go hard. We want to go fast and we want to go smooth.
Yeah. And then a lot of this does, because running is so neuromuscular, you're developing the muscle memory when you're out there. When you're running your strides and doing your hills, you are doing work that eventually will help you feel smoother, feel more efficient when you're running easy. And I know that athletes who have been, working with us for like a year or more really start to see those benefits. It's not something that happens overnight, but depending on the athlete, those kind of developments can happen pretty quickly, or you can start to feel some gains. Even within like 3 or 4 months, sometimes we see athletes start to feel better on their easy runs. And that really is because when you're running faster, you tend to really sync up and run with your best form, your most efficient movements, and things like that. Unfortunately, it's just not sustainable to run that fast all the time. So, you have to do small kind of bouts of work like that over time in order to really develop those neural pathways. And that's to keep you injury free, right? Because running is associated with all of these crazy impact forces on your musculoskeletal system. And if you run hard all the time, you end up spending a lot of time on the couch and not a lot of time running. So yeah, I really like athletes to kind of like think about like those light, smooth, and quick strides on their easy runs, and not to overthink it
like,
too much.
Getting to a higher cadence is good, but you have to get there the right way and it needs to feel easy. Otherwise, arbitrarily striving for a number to the detriment of your form and mental well-being is like, you're not going to hit a magic number and again suddenly be Jim Walmsley.
Yeah, and if you're one of those athletes who feels kind of like you're maybe plodding a little bit on your runs, or you're like your easy runs, you feel like you're maybe spending a little more time on the ground than you'd like. I always recommend to those athletes that you include some high knees and some butt kicks in your warm-up routine, because that really starts to emphasize those like really quick steps, and it keeps your feet underneath you, which is just really integral to trail running. Especially, on the roads, you can kind of get away with that longer stride a little bit, but running on the trails, you can't. You really have to have your feet underneath you for balance, and that maintaining that center of gravity is critical to staying upright while you're running.
Yeah.
So practice those butt kicks, practice those, high knees. That's something that like I'd sometimes do in my warm-ups too, even if like, especially if I had done like a big run the day before and I'm a little sore and I know that like I'm going to kind of like be a little off, especially it might take me a little extra long time to warm up because I'm kind of stiff. So like I'm really going to emphasize those things in my warm up to kind of prime my system, to further, engage those neuro pathways. That way, when I get out there and start running, I'm not like overstriding. I'm kind of keeping my feet underneath me and I'm really focusing on like that, just a smooth kind of effortless feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
don't obsess about it. You don't need to go out and buy like a pod. You don't need to like pay attention to whatever app or watch you use says your stride length is. Like, don't lose sleep over any of that.
Yeah, totally.
Like, these companies make money off of wanting you to worry about too much data.
Yeah, if you're concerned, it's very easy to count your stride rate. You can count every right foot strike for 1 minute and multiply it by 2. You end up with a large number in the 100s, and that's your stride rate. Again, that's going to change. It's natural for that stride rate to be, a little on the lower side if you're running very easy, and it's natural for that to be a little higher when you're running faster. That it makes very intuitive sense, considering when we're running harder, we really focus in on our most efficient movements, and that we tend to have a lot less time on the ground, which means we're making a lot more steps. And I would also mention that make sure, if you're one of those people who on your easy runs is like doing like 200 or something for stride rate per minute, you might want to just think about maybe lengthening that stride just a little bit. Like, anything like anything in training, if you're on the extremes of something, it's probably not the best place to operate from.
Yeah.
You want to try to be more towards that middle. 180 is an ideal place to be. I think 160, is probably fine for an easy run, but if, pushing that up a little bit with time would be ideal. And if you're experiencing like a lot of quad tightness and glute tightness, that's also going to really shorten your stride length quite a lot. So make sure that you guys, especially people who are running the trails and doing a lot of climbing, you're spending plenty of time after your runs stretching your quads, because over the course of a season running in the mountains, you can just develop a lot of tightness in those muscles, and it's going to naturally start to shorten the length, the way that your body and your legs can kind of extend out. And so you can get a little bit slower as a result of that.
Yeah. To answer Annalise's question, Koros gives an overall fitness score. Friend told me that it's normal for fitness to decline during having training volume. Is that true, or should it just be ignored entirely? Anytime your watch tells you anything other than great job, disregard it. Like, the technology is not that good. And like, there's a reason that you hire a coach and you don't just let a computer on your wrist tell you what to do, right? Like, that watch can't take into account numerous other training factors, sleep, respiratory rate, so many other things. Like, I know half the time, like the day before, usually like my A race for the season, my watch will be like, you're detraining. And I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's like, just don't, like, literally don't even pay attention to that noise. Like, you can, for most of these watches, you can like program it so it doesn't tell you that stuff, but like, it is just not good. I'm not just like saying that to like make you believe in yourselves or anything. I'm saying it because the technology is genuinely flawed, and just turn it off.
Yeah, don't overemphasize those digital devices.
Yeah. If they were that
helpful,
good,
but
there wouldn't be coaches, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
the
and
Olympic team would be coached by a watch at this point.
it's such a good question though, because I would much rather my athletes kind of think about just attuning to how their bodies are really feeling, and not deciding that you feel one way or the other because of the fact that your watch told you're a little bit detrained or something. If you're feeling fatigued, you're peaking in your training volume, headed towards a taper and a race. Very, very normal. Very, very normal. Obviously you've accumulated a ton of time on your feet and done a lot of training, and so being tired, yeah, that's just going to happen. And maybe not producing like your best output levels on hills and during in strides and in workouts, like totally normal. And that's really why we don't want you guys to rely on pace. We don't want you to rely on like whether your whoop tells you you're 50% recovered or 90% recovered. There's a lot of other stronger indicators.
There is no technology that exists that is smarter than you are.
Yeah. And in this whole process, guys, if you've got any questions about it, spend 3 months writing a little bit more in your training logs about how you're feeling, and you'll start to be able to put together some of those ideas better in your own heads and articulate them in a way that makes sense to your coach. And you'll start to see some of those patterns develop. You know, a lot of athletes who aren't as intuitive, and it's not even that intuitive, it becomes very obvious, you know, but a lot of athletes who are unable to interpret their body feedback, like i.e. soreness, the difference between soreness and injury, the difference between like mental fatigue and physical fatigue, whatever the things are that affect your training. Usually it's just the product of not fully embracing the training logs and using that space to articulate how you feel.
Or over articulating it too. Like
Or
you don't want to
Yeah, sure.
There's the happy medium it's a big space.
It is. It's bigger than people think. I think sometimes the over analysis can just become too overwhelming as well.
Well, I mean, it's just like not productive. Like the best communication is effective communication. It's not over communicating and it's not under communicating. You know,
yeah.
Like if you're feeling too much of one thing, it's going to crowd out other important feelings. And sometimes an important feeling is a non-feeling, and you have to be equally attuned to that.
To not feeling anything?
Yeah, to being like, oh, like my hamstrings feel fine.
Normal.
Like that's a feeling, and you have to learn to listen to it.
Tight is the new normal for me.
Tiny little stride rate. Like a little hamster.
300.
300.
strides per
Ding, ding,
minute.
ding, 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 ding.
Chelsea has a follow-up question about the Whoop, which is the rage right now. Yeah, I have a Whoop. I don't really have an opinion on it so much yet.
I used to have one, and I stopped using it because it was basically just something that told me I was great at sleeping.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I just didn't want to pay to have something tell me I was good at sleeping. I can sleep for free.
Yeah, I think, you know, the interesting thing about the Whoop, at least for me, it's been, I'm sorry, I was really distracted by Garrett Gall doing some kind of deadlifts there. I don't know if you guys see that, but that is pretty fun. Nice work on the cross training, Garrett.
Love it.
Yeah, I think, you know, the interesting thing about the Whoop for athletes who are having trouble developing recovery routines, the Whoop can really show you that you're not pulling your weight in terms of what you do outside of your training. And that, I think, for me has been that, and heart rate variability are the two things that I really like about the Whoop. I am stretching more, meditating more often, and paying more attention to my sleep routines as a result of using the Whoop, because I get to see every day how that affects my heart rate variability, which is a strong indicator of whether or not you're recovering well between workouts and whether or not your parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system is kind of engaged or not. So yes, I think that there is actually room for those devices. Depends totally on the person.
Depends on the person.
Depends on what your needs are. You know, like 2 years ago, I would never have needed a Whoop. I was dialed with my recovery. Now I'm just gravitate to the computer and to work all the time. And I need help to develop, you know, my recovery routines, or else I don't feel good on my training. I don't, you know, so for me, I felt like I've had it for 4 weeks now, I think, almost 30 nights of sleep. And I've definitely been using it to kind of help me to like really dial in my recovery so I can train better. Cool. We have a couple other follow-ups here about not needing a Whoop to tell you when you're hungry. Yeah, definitely not. Exactly. And definitely not when you're tired. Yeah, definitely always default to how you feel. I mean, these devices are only secondary, if not third in kind of the lineup. This may be a question for a different time, but what's the happy place for the training log feedback? What's like the happy place for the training log feedback? I don't want to waste my coach's time by writing fluff, but also want to give enough information. Oh man, it's so hard to...
The difference, so the way I'll explain it is like, do I need to know what you had for breakfast? No, I do not. Do I need to know if you skipped breakfast? Yes. Do I need to know if you had an allergic reaction to your breakfast? Yes. So just like random, super detailed information, not that important until it affects your training meaningfully.
Yeah.
That being said, like if you're going through stuff that you just want to talk to someone about, that's like fine. With the disclosure that we're not therapists and we might direct you to a therapist at a certain point. But like we're there for you, but we will be able to give you the best, most appropriate feedback when you're just communicating clearly, right? Like if you're, if you're playing taboo and you're trying to get someone to like guess what you're saying, you're not just going to spew as many words as possible at them. You're going to try to be intentional. It's just communication theory. Like if you've talked to a person, you're a good communicator. But again, like I don't need to know what you had for breakfast. I need to know how that may or may not impact your training.
Yeah, I think sometimes some brevity is really helpful.
Because like if you're always trying to find signal in the noise, that can be challenging.
Yeah,
For some people, it's like an epistolary novel every day.
And that's just like, it's so hard for me to read 500 words where 400 of them are completely unrelated to anything about the training.
Yeah.
Because then I get tired by reading all of the fluff. And I'm like, where is this at all related to the training? And it's like nice because I get to know my athletes better and I love that. But then sometimes I'm just like, what do I even say? Because like none of this related to the training, and I would rather give feedback that's relative to the training. That way the athlete can use that feedback for the next training day. And so, yeah, I think sometimes, there is kind of like a happy medium or a happy place with the logs. I'm not going to tell you what that is or what that is.
Because it's going to look different for every person on every day, right?
Totally.
Like if we're not idiots, and if if we wanted to, we could put a cap on how many characters you got in a log, but we don't do that because we believe it's important for you to have the space to write what feels important to you, and it doesn't feel right for a coach to dictate what that looks like.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. I mean, that's why only on a few rare occasions have I asked athletes to be a little bit more concise, because the daily kind of like play by play of what you ate and your dog ate and your trip to the mall and like the 12 friends that you talk to, it's just like, after a while, months, years with some athletes, it's just like, we need to just get down to the training, like, because I'm not able to give you feedback that is helpful for you, because you're clouding it with all of this other information that is really not relative to the process that we have going on.
Sometimes things that are not directly like things that beyond just describing your run will be relevant to your training. For example, if you start a new job, if you're moving, if you're going through stuff like that, becomes relevant to your training because it affects your stress levels. If it's just becomes like you riding on the road day in, day out in like a stream of consciousness scroll, that's when it becomes less effective. And again, like there's no hard and fast rules on this. We just want to be effective, and that takes effective communication for both partners.
Yeah, I mean, we're here, this is about more than just running, obviously, but running is kind of the vehicle.
If all we wanted was the data, we Strava creep you and give you a thumbs up every day,
Yeah. Chris kind of makes a good comment here. He says it, really sounds like you want us to do a little processing before we write our notes, rather than just do the stream of consciousness thing. And yeah, I mean, obviously we appreciate that. But not everybody's going to do that. And we recognize that some people, are working on that and whatnot. But yeah, you should spend some time processing these things. The log is a form of processing for sure. But I don't know, at least when I write in my log, I try to take a step back before kind of letting it all spill out, especially on a hard day. Because
how often are you like in the first couple miles of your run, are you accidentally already writing the log entry?
A couple times every 3 months. Yeah, it definitely happens on tough days.
Yeah.
You're already out there writing that log.
You're like, today was impossible. Running is terrible. And then it ends up being fine.
But like, that's good processing though. Because, normally like if I have a run like that, I get home and I'm like, all right, well, I've already been through this. Like, I don't necessarily need, my coach to like realize like how stressful my day was and that like affected my run. Could be just be like, yeah, I had a really, it was a pretty tough day. We've got some pretty high stresses. Zoe just changed her job over, and I was kind of feeling a little bit of that, and like we're trying to figure some stuff out. So I just ran extra easy today. You know, whatever it is, it's 3 sentences.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, yeah, it's we want you guys to use the space in the way that's best for you all. Just know that we can only comment on so much. So if you're gonna write 500 words about your dog,
We do
and
read
none of
it.
that
We
is,
do read
yeah,
it.
and none of that's related to your training, I'm gonna read it and not comment on that most likely, because I just can't comment on everything. It's just,
Yeah.
we only have so much time.
Only so much time.
Yeah. And it's not that those things aren't important. It's just sometimes we have to get right to how are we going to get you to that A race? And it's
Yeah.
maybe not talking
Or just
about your
like
dog
show
today.
up and support you, because sometimes if someone,
Totally.
particularly if someone's writing something that's like not very helpful for themselves, like if they're writing negative things about themselves, there are some people for whom responding to it in certain ways kind of like feeds the monster rather than working through it productively.
Oh my gosh. That's why it's so important just to coach the individual.
Exactly.
It's so hard to talk about these
No
things.
hard
It
and fast
really
rules.
depends on like each, yeah. And I'm looking at so many of my athletes right now, and you guys all do a great job. And I really appreciate
Right.
all
I
of
mean,
you
look,
guys.
someone's doing like literal pull-ups in the background. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
Garrett's crushing it. He's
Wow.
not my athlete. I think he's Kristen's athlete.
Way to go, Kristen and Garrett.
All right, let's move on.
Well, in 34 minutes, we have answered one question.
Actually, we answered several questions. Thanks for using the chat box, guys. I appreciate it.
Crushing
it's really
it.
fun. Okay. Here's a great question. I'm not sure it answers this. Will my training at altitude help when I get to Texas like the heat helps when you go to altitude? I know that heat creates platelets, which help the blood flow better when you get to altitude. But does it work in reverse? Will all these extra blood cells help me in any way in the Texas heat? Great question.
It will help a little bit, but how much has never actually been specifically studied in endurance runners.
Yeah, I would say that probably it won't help you as much as the other way around, right? Like
it's not something I would like focus on.
Yeah, the having that blood volume is going to be really beneficial at altitude, but I think so much of getting used to running in the heat is just getting used to running in the heat. And there's a lot of other processes at work there.
Right, like there's only one like similar processes. So like there's one thing that's lining up and there's 10 other factors on both sides.
Yeah, because
so like don't be over reliant on that one connecting factor.
I definitely wouldn't. And if I was an athlete who was living at elevation but needed to go run in lower elevation in very hot temperatures, I would actually really, really, really focus in on running as many runs as possible in the hottest temperatures in the day.
You can bundle up.
Or, putting on a down jacket. This is something that, we have done and have had friends that have done training for hot races, but when it's too cool out, running in leggings with like a down jacket and a hat on and gloves, trying to make it hotter. That can really help, because a lot of the adaptations that are happening when you're getting used to running in the heat, it's a tolerance level. It's being comfortable in those conditions. The other part of that is kind of this, it's almost a metabolic process. It's a processing of ability to stay hydrated, ability to retain more electrolytes instead of sweat out all of your salts and electrolytes. And those kind of things aren't necessarily going to happen at altitude. So, in fact, like the demand for those things is actually greater at altitude. So that could make it harder to adapt to those specific needs for running in the heat. So no, I would not over rely on that.
Yeah.
Zoe, the final word.
Don't over rely on it.
Awesome.
Nailed
it. Cool. Yeah. Great
I'm not
question.
saying
Great
it's not
question, though.
helpful,
I never
but
thought about it in reverse
it's
until
just like
now.
not. I mean, it's just like, again, it's like what heat adaptation is actually like 40 different processes, right? So just because one of those processes lines up with another,
With altitude.
yeah, with altitude doesn't, like I wouldn't. It's way less important than just like sleeping well, eating well, taking
Yeah.
care of yourself, training.
Train in the heat. Cool. All right. Moving on. Great question. This is a deep question here. Thanks for sending this over. Appreciate the big picture questions. In the big picture, how do you progress our training from base building through race day? How do you think strength training fits into that at various stages along the way? Wow. I mean, this is a big question. I think
It's basically how do you training?
how do you train somebody? Great. I'm going to take this through the lens of the strength training because I think that this kind of can really help give us a good look at this. When we are working on things in a base building phase, generally we're working on growth of the aerobic system. We might be increasing a volume, aerobic volume. So more easy runs, maybe easy moderate runs, and some runs with tempos, but below lactic threshold. It's generally a really good kind of time of year, probably a lot of hill work to develop strength and power. That's usually a really good phase to be working on strength work. We're developing kind of this foundation, right? We're laying like these bricks that all the other training is going to kind of fall on top of.
I would say the caveat for this is this specific advice is really a better fit for like intermediate to advanced athletes who are already highly trained.
Because of the strength component, or
well, just because like you don't need to be that hyper specific if you're like just getting into running.
Well, yeah, but most of our runners have been running for several years and are doing ultras and stuff. So
sure, I mean, we coach people like every ability level, so it's very specific.
It is specific, but I think there are generalities that really work.
I'm just
for
saying,
this.
like, if I coach a lot of runners who literally started running this year, and this advice is not as appropriate for them.
Well, I would say a base building phase of training is appropriate for everybody.
Well, base building, yes, but like, I wouldn't necessarily recommend periodizing strength training for.
Why not?
Because I think it's at that level, and I think honestly for a lot of people it's actually a better idea to strength train less but more consistently rather than overthink it and be like, okay, I'm going to do a crap ton of strength training before I do my speed block, because that's like not that helpful.
Nobody here is suggesting that we do a 5-day-a-week strength kind of training.
I'm just saying regimen. Like it's very dependent on your ability level. It's very dependent on what base building is to you.
Well, base building for us at Microcosm is kind of developing a base of mileage. It's developing a kind of a very systematic way of helping you to make not only musculoskeletal adaptations so you can handle more work later and work towards your goals from an effective place of injury resilience, but also it's the ability to develop some strength too. And we get a lot of strength from running, right? We can gain a lot of strength from running. We can gain a lot of strength from running some hills. And this is something that, newer runners, they can really get a lot out of that. But, I think across the board, we're recommending like band work and just really like general kind of stuff. Reverse lunges, forward lunges, squats, step ups. This stuff isn't like crazy complicated, and doing it 2 days a week is fairly easy to accomplish, but it can really go a long way in kind of strengthening injury prone areas for an athlete, especially an athlete who is newer. I don't think that we necessarily need to overemphasize it where it's like, you're not going to run on Tuesdays because you're going to do 30 minutes of strength work. And I do want to stay on topic with the question, but fitting a little bit of that work in, especially in a base building phase, we can talk about for intermediate athletes and above. this is going to provide you kind of with the foundation for more strenuous and intense training later. So if you leave the strength work out, you could be opening yourself up to potential injury opportunity later on. So, 2 days a week of strength is really great. Doing some core after your runs, really, really great and important. As kind of your volume increases, say you're working towards a race at this point, you can start to kind of interject some more like race specific kind of strength work, maybe some, muscular endurance routine or whatever. You're working with Emily at Little Summits or another strength coach who is able to kind of take account the actual like training volume that you're doing and then the race goal that you have and provide you with a very specific, easy to achieve strength work. But like having that base of strength really does help. And I think, across the board for the athletes that I coach, if we're in a period of base building, usually from a lot of people that kind of is in the winter, that's like just after Christmas or, around Thanksgiving and afterwards, because the race season has basically ended. And so a lot of that is just aerobic miles, just staying consistent, reinforcing the adaptations that athlete has made throughout the entire season, and then taking that foundation and really probably lowering the overall volume that they're doing by week. It's cold, it's winter, don't want to be running as much, but raising the intensity a little bit, using that as kind of a period 8, 10, or 12 weeks, depending on the athlete's history and their experience level, to really start to work on economy and things like that. I do like to have athletes have a base of strength before then. But when we're kind of doing that more intense work, the strength kind of takes a little bit of a backseat. Recovery is much more important. Some strength maintenance, like the band work, is something that should be done all year round. It's very simple, can be incorporated into a warm up. Making sure that your IT bands are healthy, that your glutes are firing. Super, super easy stuff. And then taking it from there, you take that base, you put speed on top of it, and then you start to, build the athlete towards their goals. And most of the people that we're working with have a couple A races every single year, and they have a few races that might help them lead up to that. And so, in making their plan, it just evolves out of that. And I think sometimes for athletes who have been with the program for a while, the outlook of the plan isn't necessarily any different from the work that they've done before. They're just doing that work at a higher level. Perhaps the amount of repetitions available to them now is greater in their workouts because we need a little bit more work to provoke the adaptations. But generally, they're doing those workouts faster. They're just doing it at a higher level. The overall weekly volume may have increased a little bit from the year before. But again, totally depends on the athlete.
Yeah. So like, generally the way to think about it is like for most people, but not everyone, we are training them for a specific event. So further out from the event, we're training more general things that are less plastic qualities, like aerobic capacity, economy, like less specific systems. Long-term stuff. As we get closer to events, that's when we'll start to train more specific systems. For instance, like doing more specific hill workouts, more specific endurance focused workouts, marathon workouts. You'll see those closer to the race, potentially also incorporating more specific strength training, like mountain legs before a bigger vertiginous race. But basically, the closer to the event, you want to be more specific in your training. Further away, you want to be more general.
Yeah, love that. That's definitely the way that we are operating in planning. So important to kind of have that marriage between the long-term goals, working towards getting better at running, and using the foundation that's created there to step up to your race goals. Just feeling really strong and like a better runner. And then adapting the workouts to really target the specific demands of the individual events. And that just is going to look a little bit different to every single athlete because everybody is running at different levels. This question does have a follow-up question, which is really great. And the author is also curious, what do we do behind the scenes in regard to planning the training? What's the methodology? How do you keep track of the volumes and analyze everything? Is there a system for reviewing notes, etc.? Would you like me to start with this?
And my answer to that is yes and no. Like we don't, obsessively pick apart your data, but from your data we get a really good feel for what your baseline is, and then I always have an awareness of where I want to take someone and like what specific workout. Like let's say there's an athlete who, I mean, you understand where someone is and where you want them to be, and then you know how to get them there.
Yeah, so kind of what I'm hearing is that, when you're working with an athlete, you're making an assessment about where they're at. And then
Yes.
you're trying to meet them where they're at with the current training load. And
But I
then you
think it's a
develop
lot
that load
less
over
like,
time.
but I'm also not looking for like a secret code within there, like, oh, like, look, their easy days got 0.08% faster. Like, it's not that either.
Yeah, it's definitely not. No, because that wouldn't be very productive. And I think
No.
especially because when athletes are training from season to season, it is normal to see things like, for a lot of athletes, like, oh yeah, this athlete, compared to last year, they're running like, 30 seconds a mile faster on average on their easy days. You get a general sense for that when you see them logging kind of their runs. You get used to like, all right, that's like they're doing like that neighborhood loop again, and that's like a great baseline loop for you to see like what their easy efforts are or whatnot, and then you can kind of see progress based on that. I personally, we're working hard to try to develop a better system for, and because I find it helpful to help keep track of athlete like weekly and monthly volume. um, because I feel like it is kind of important to have a grasp of where an athlete was before historically, and then where they are now, and then where maybe they need to be in order to achieve the goals they want to achieve. And I think, although those numbers don't need to be concrete, and I think it's more of an intuitive process in getting to know the athlete over time, having some baselines in the data, specifically in the amount of volume prescription, whether that's time per week or whether that's volume per week, can be really helpful in giving a good solid plan. I rely a lot on Strava for that. I also really rely on the Command F function in the training logs, where you can keystroke and search anything you want. Basically, any word is searchable in there. So I quite often search things, especially when it comes to how an athlete feels about something, because historically you can go back in the logs and kind of target similar language that they've used and kind of see, what was going on then. How did we work through that? Let's maybe apply some of those same techniques now, or remind them of what they did before. And I would really encourage you guys to use that function. I know a lot of people who are probably listening to this call are unscrolling their log and putting it, and like condensing it and then unscrolling it. And I hope that you're doing that because you're looking back at kind of the work that you've done before, and maybe that's helping you through something that you're going through right now. Because the whole reason why we do one, I wish we could do 10-year commitment for every athlete. Because like, if you're really just like engaging year after year, you're learning so much about yourself. You're starting to realize like, well, yeah, maybe life doesn't get easier, but like you're developing all of these perspectives and skills along the way that make you're more equipped to deal with the challenges, or you've had these similar experiences before, so you know a little bit better how to react to them. And the log is really kind of your space to like look at what you've done before, and your coaches are doing that. I do that, especially when athletes are having kind of tough moments, very related to the training and things like that. I also I really like using Strava because it just kind of lays the volume out for me as a coach. I really
I
like
like
to
seeing
see
that
that
visual
data.
of it. Yeah.
So if you're not on Strava, I would encourage you to use it, because that kind of visual tool, it's also really good to look at your consistency that way as well. You can really see the highs and lows in your training, and every athlete is different. Sometimes, great training is a lot of oscillations in volume. It's 3 weeks of ascending volume with a really drastic lows for recovery. Or sometimes great training is just doing 60 miles a week for 12 weeks straight. It really just depends on the athlete. Um, so yeah, I think we're constantly using the logs for this kind of stuff. We use Strava. Yes, Chris mentions Power Lab. Yeah, I have an integrated system on my end of the coaching. I have a few athletes who are currently betaing this for me. Chris, you're one of them. Thank you. Appreciate all your feedback with that. It's been super helpful. Power Lab does a very good job of tracking the historical data for me, and that's something that I get to look at with your plan. And some of the other athletes I coach is unfortunately not ready to roll out for the entire team because of there's some issues with Google spreadsheets. So we're trying to figure out how we can use that with everybody, but yeah, it could be a little while longer. But the second probably best thing to that is if athletes upload their stuff to Strava, because that also gives kind of that historical data, right? And I think that's so important, like what Zoe mentioned, like so much of coaching is like meeting an athlete where they're at. And like when you've worked with athletes for a number of years, and like I have at this point, those athletes have leveled up many, many times. I think of some of my favorite athletes that have been with me from the beginning, the yellow spreadsheets. You guys don't know about the yellow spreadsheets, but the yellow spreadsheet athletes, oh man, like this is leveling,
like 1,000.
Yeah,
something.
like leveling up so many times. And like if I kept giving them the same training that they had 1,000 days ago, they would not be getting better. And so, a lot of those athletes really have been using Strava, which I greatly appreciate because of the historical data there. But again, like when an athlete levels up, the coach needs to meet them where they're at. And so it's not always sometimes there's a bit of trial and error with that. An athlete can really be leveling up, then you give them some more volume, then something happens and they get a niggle happens or a little bit of an overuse injury. And then,
or some athletes don't respond well to high volume.
Right. Or you get to,
slower.
right. Or you get to a point where it's like the athlete doesn't really need more volume to get better.
Yeah.
What they need is more intensity or something, they need a different intervention. So everybody's so different. There's not one hard rule on any of this, except for every athlete's individual. And so you coach to every individual. You use kind of some generalized methodology, like, train for long-term gains in the beginning of the season, train for race specific gains closer to each race. But kind of like that's like the meat and potatoes, but like what's actually in there, the good stuff, is just totally different for every person. I hope that made sense to you guys.
I feel like the answer to all of our questions was like, don't overthink it, but it's also super complicated.
It isn't possible to not overthink.
It's impossible to not overthink. Microcosm overthinking.
Yep. Just meditate more. It helps silence that chatter. All right. We got time for one more. What are you learning about moving from an apartment to a house that you can transfer to your running, or vice versa? Zoe.
Less is more.
Less is more.
More stuff, more miles, more whatever doesn't make you happier or better or faster. It's just junk, right? Like volume, house volume. Shoe volume. It's just stuff, and if it's the correct amount of stuff is the amount of stuff that works for you. Not like you don't, get a house and then immediately try to fill it with stuff. You grow into it.
Oh, I love that. That's been an ongoing conversation for us.
Yeah.
Nice, Zoe. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, we're moving this week. We're finally moving out of our 500 square foot apartment.
You're seeing the whole apartment
into a better space for us and for two people who work from home. And we're really excited about that.
So excited.
But it's definitely been a long journey. It's been a 9-month process. And yeah, man, I don't even know where to start with this answer. I've got 3 minutes to figure it out. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm just trying to learn to I'm trying to reinforce the understanding that, doing a little bit every day is a better way of operating for me than to do like these huge like bouts of work and then just get exhausted and then just like recover and then do a huge bout of work. I'm really
We've done some like high intensity interval packing.
We did. Saturday that was a pretty good session. That was
Yeah.
definitely took me out. I was definitely
was
feeling
like,
that session on Sunday's run.
It's tough because Saturday's our only day off, so it's like kind of the only day that we get to like pack. Yeah. But it's also the day that we most need to like really not be on our feet moving things.
Yeah, and I felt that. I was like, man, if we could have spread that out into like 3 days, my run probably would have been better on Sunday. But like, you can't really get too deep into that.
But also
like,
you could, it's like also one of those things in training where it's like you could stress yourself out trying to control stuff that you just can't control, or you could be like, yeah, it kind of sucks. This is my only day to pack. I could stress out about it, or I could just do it and then try to like optimize recovery later.
We embraced it. I thought we did a good job. I was surprised at how much packing we got done.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
We were simultaneously making chicken nuggets, vegan chicken nuggets, and packing. So I would like pack a box, eat a couple nugs, pack a box, eat a couple nugs. Yeah. Getting in that protein post run.
That's so funny. I think for me, it's really that like, like anything, a big move, whatever, it's a lot of small pieces that come together over time. Yeah, there might be some bigger pieces involved in that, like, doing like a 3.5, 4 hour like crash course into like packing up your house. But, we've also done numerous, multitude of other steps along the way, including in the packing process.
Yeah.
Over the last, 6 weeks to try to get us to a point where like we could at least, still be doing our jobs, still be training, still have a little time to watch Ted Lasso, like, so that, for me, it's like all about like a little bit every day really adds up. Like you don't necessarily need to like go super, super hard for super long and like
go like ham.
Yeah, you don't like need to do that because sometimes that just, at least for me, I don't operate well on the extremes. Yeah. I do much better.
There was also one of the days where I went super ham. I packed up like all the stuff in the kitchen, like flour, salt, like stuff where in the moment it felt right until I needed flour or salt. And then I was like, oh shit, like shouldn't have gone so ham.
Well, we're in a no oven rule right now in our house because it's too hot. Once we put that oven on, it's like 100 degrees.
100 degrees in the house.
All right. Well, we'll get back to you more on this question. Once we've moved.
Yeah. Also, upper body strength. It makes me wish I was still a climber because, like, as a distance runner, I am totally useless. Like, even just moving boxes like into our garage, I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah. Thank goodness we have a garage. That's the saving grace of this place.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you got something out of this call. I know I sure learned a lot. We will see you next Monday, and I hope everybody has a great week.
Yeah. We'll have better lighting.
Be kind to yourselves. Enjoy the heat. Embrace it. Stay hydrated. Bye.